Surviving the Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime on trending criminal cases. And this, the Suzanne Morphew murder, this story has been in the news since 2020 when she went missing on Mother's Day, only to be discovered in what is known as the Boneyard. And now the prime suspect is her ex-husband, Barry Morphew, who was just re-indicted and re-arrested during a traffic stop. And we've got some amazing best guests and pretty much a brand new panel. One has been here before, the rest are all new. But let me introduce, we've got Mike King. You guys know Mike. He is a criminal profiler, the host of Profiling Evil, worked in law enforcement for many decades, coming to us from beautiful Utah. Next up, we've got Colin McCallen, a veteran defense attorney out of Denver and host of a podcast that he does with his law partner. Is This Legal? Good name for a true crime podcast. And Chris Calvert here. She is a mystery and suspense and thriller writer and host of Hitch to Homicide, coming to us from Lexington, Kentucky. So thank you all for being here. And Mike, I'm going to start with you on this. I got a slew of questions. But the most interesting news today, I think, is word that his ex-girlfriend is now essentially turned on him, basically saying that she doesn't really believe in his innocence after standing by him for more than 4 years after Suzanne went missing. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, I think this is going to be a smart move for the prosecution to bring out people like this to kind of lay the groundwork that past behavior might be predictive of future behavior. This idea that if there is some form of domestic violence in the relationships, that could lean toward the prosecution's favor on this thing. I mean, everybody, when they break up, has a bad deal going, and they don't like the person that they broke up, or they have things that they didn't like about them, and that's what caused them to not hang out with them. But if she's talking about things like emotional abuse or other kinds of things, coercive control, and frankly, the article itself, I thought was pretty darn revealing when it talked about how she's going through this kind of trauma counseling even today, trying to figure out, why was I pulled into this? Why did I allow someone to control me? And why did I continue to stay in this and even defend that person? But it's normal behavior I've seen so many times in domestic violence cases. And this is why I think it's so important that we continue to bang the drum in regard to domestic violence, because it doesn't get better on its own. It just continues. The behaviors repeat with new relationships, and it shows just how damaging this stuff can be.
Yeah. I mean, Chris, to that point, she spoke to, I believe it's the Daily Mail. This is the ex-girlfriend now, Shasha Dark, 55 years old. She dated, as I said, Barry Morphew for 4 years after Suzanne's disappearance, and it is the Daily Mail. And she's quoted as saying, obviously, this is my worst fear coming true, that he could be responsible. And to Mike's point, she says she's now in counseling for trauma and narcissism, having dealt with narcissism and even coercive control. This is the stuff that your fictional books are made of, but this is not fictional. This is real life.
No, and if you remember, her best friend, Suzanne's best friend, Sheila, I believe her name is, actually bought a spy pin because she was so worried about Suzanne. And Suzanne had said over and over again that Barry would stalk her and, you know, and treat her as if she was in a domestic, you know, abuse relationship. She was afraid of him. So it only stands to reason, you know, a leopard doesn't change his spots. I totally agree. If what he's going to do to one, he will eventually do to another. And I mean, I think after the breakup, she's ready to come forward. Plus, who wants to yeah, everything looks pretty bad now that, all the evidence has really sort of come out of the autopsy. So who wants to be tagging along with that?
Mm.
I can see where she would want to get out.
Yeah. Great point. And, Colin, to you, this is potentially an important witness. We obviously we're far away from any kind of witness list. We're far from a trial still, which is probably 12 months to 2 years away. That's what I was told the other night by a Denver criminal defense attorney. But this woman, Shasha Dark, again coming out, speaking to the Daily Mail, and she says a lot of things, including speaking of Barry, of course, he seemed to miss her, meaning Suzanne. He seemed like he was grieving, and she says, on the one hand, he's such a kind, generous, loving person. But on the other hand, I've had my own experience with him when it hasn't always been that way. A jury hears that, knowing some of the other evidence, it's going to be trouble for the defense here. So what about this? If you are representing Barry Morphew, what are you doing this far ahead of the game to try to quell some of this news coming out today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, boy, if I was representing Barry Morphew, I would have a very, very long list of things that we would need to accomplish. That's for sure, because the landscape of this case has changed so dramatically. I've been following this case from the very beginning, back before we had the discovery of Suzanne Morphew's body, and it's amazing how this has changed so much. But kind of coming back to your question. Yes, what we're dealing with here is a witness. This is a separate witness who most likely does not have any direct knowledge of what happened to Suzanne Morphew. Maybe Barry's talked about it a little bit to her, and that's something that she might be interviewed about by police investigators or district attorney investigators. Certainly, I would expect, if I were her, I would expect to be contacted by those folks and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you. We'd like to have you come in for an interview. Now, there are some tools that can help the prosecutor. I think that it's starting to emerge that the prosecution might be looking at Barry Morphew as kind of a domestic violence controlling abuser. This is someone who he didn't want to let his partner leave the relationship. There was evidence that that's what she was going to do. And certainly if another girlfriend had similar experiences with Barry Morphew, the prosecution might be able to go into some of those areas to show a pattern, to show that this is not the first time, like Chris just said, to show that a leopard sometimes doesn't change its spots. Now, is this going to be a witness that's, where the case rides and falls with her? I don't think so. And honestly, I think there's a little bit of a mixed bag there. Kind of like Chris just said, things are looking bad for Barry. It makes sense that she might come forward now and say, oh, okay, well, this is a little too much. I think I want to distance myself from this person. So we'll see, but absolutely it's interesting. And I'm sure law enforcement will be following up with her.
100%. I would agree. And I want to dig back into the girlfriend in a minute, but Mike, we did this, I think 2 nights ago. And one of the really interesting questions that I'm still pondering is, they found these bones in Saguache County, right, in this very rural area. But everything points to the fact that it was moved, that the bones, the body, and some of the remains, the clothing was moved there. The question to the criminal profiler is, it seems like Barry had her hidden pretty well, if presumably he is the one who was hiding her. What do you think the impetus was to move her? She was basically found like a needle in a haystack. They were looking for another woman, but then they go ahead and come across these bones that ultimately turn out to be hers. I saw a very interesting tweet that said something along the lines of, he couldn't cash in on the life insurance policy without a body, and maybe wanted the body to be found. Why would he move her?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And maybe when we go back and talk a little bit about Shasha, I think it's interesting when you start looking at the physical characteristics between Suzanne and Shasha. And I would really be interested, as someone who looks at behavior, as what her behavior was like and how similar or dissimilar it was to Suzanne. But I think a couple of things that you bring up that make me think out loud. And yeah, thanks for popping this up, Joel, because
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting. There are characteristics that seem very similar if you're looking for a replacement, and then of course behaviorally and what her personality is like in comparison to Suzanne. And the reason I say that is because we've learned additionally in that same article that you were referencing that she talks about that she has this great relationship with the girls. What is it that made it easy for her to connect to the girls, if in fact that's all true? And again, these are all things, and I'd love to have the defense perspective on this, because if they can get Barry at some point or someone to come across saying, I don't have any problems with domestic violence, and it seems like they open a huge doorway for her and that testimony or other potential girlfriends who may or may not have come forward to come forward and say, hey, here's what I'm hearing, or the friends to say, here's what that I was being told, or here's the tweet that she sent, or the social media that said these things were happening. And I've gone completely down a different rabbit hole than you asked me about, so I'm going to shift gears. And I don't know, Colin, if you want to try to answer that first before I talk a little bit about the disposal site, or if you want me to just quit asking questions like that.
Well, let's Colin, why don't you hop in? Before you do, so when they found these bones, and this is really what put everything into motion, there was a lack of bug or animal activity at the burial site, suggesting again that this decomposition happened elsewhere. That it was a shallow grave in Saguache County, and there was indication, I think, that on top of it, that there was no, like I said, bug or animal activity, plus bleaching was done. The bottom line here, Colin, is authorities believe that the body was moved into this rare area. What's your theory as to why it might have been moved? Is it the money issue, potentially?
Boy, I mean, that's a great question, and it's certainly not one that I know I can answer. But I mean, truthfully, that's something that, if I'm being candid, does kind of bother me about this case. And it's honestly something that might weigh in Barry Morphew's favor in this one area. If Barry Morphew is in fact the person that's responsible for Suzanne's death, then we know from the affidavit that we have that he went to great lengths to conceal his activity. He went to great lengths to conceal his cell phone data, her cell phone data, his vehicle data. He seemed to be very careful. And that's in contrast with the fact that her remains are found in what is characterized as a shallow grave. This is like, if this person is being thorough and meticulous, why would he allow a burial to be done in such a way where the body could basically inevitably be discovered? I mean, is it possible that he was doing this to cash out on an insurance policy? Sure. And, sometimes we're never going to understand the motivations between people who do these horrific acts. We're never going to fully understand. But at the same time, I find it extremely risky for a person in his position, if this was him, where he would literally move a body from one location to another. There is risk in that, and I just don't know if that's something that is going to bear out. So that's a stretch to me. But that said, it's a weird fact in the case. I don't understand it, and we'll have to learn more about what they found at that site there.
So, do I understand you correctly? Do you think that maybe he's not the one who moved the body? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, that's certainly a possibility. I mean, I'm trying to think of it in terms of if he buried the body in location A, and the shallow grave is location B in Saguache County, where the body was found. Why would he do this? If the body was so concealed as to escape law enforcement? I mean, let's not forget the fact that his first trial was dismissed just 10 days before a jury was going to be impaneled, and they still didn't have a body. In Linda Stanley, that was the prosecutor who handled the case, in her motion to dismiss, she specifically said in her motion to dismiss, we're actually expecting to find the body. We think we know where it is. We think we're going to be able to recover the body sometime in the spring, I think is what she said in her affidavit. That ended up not being the case. It's really hard to understand why this body would be moved and under what circumstances, and most importantly, who did it. Can they prove it was Barry? Could he have had an accomplice, or are they on the wrong track? And from the very beginning, it's a weird fact, and we'll have to see. I'm sure there's more information out there that we're going to find out about that gravesite.
Yeah, and I promise I'm coming to Chris and back to Mike in a second, but Colin's the attorney in Denver, has been following this. So you mentioned DA Linda Stanley. I believe she was ultimately disbarred. But yeah. What everyone talks about the prosecutorial misconduct. Was there a specific issue, or was it just a sort of a combination of many things that led to this? I mean, what was at the core of her apparent ineptness?
I mean, we covered Linda Stanley almost as much as we covered Barry Morphew on our podcast, because frankly, we found some of her moves very baffling and hard to understand. I think it was a perfect storm of circumstances, Joel. I mean, you have, first of all, she was relatively inexperienced as a prosecutor. She was elected in 2020, and this mammoth case, high profile case, lands on her desk. Okay, and so we also know that this is a relatively small jurisdiction. I'm here based in Denver. Denver's a big jurisdiction. To put this in perspective, Chaffee County, Saguache County, these are small counties with maybe 5 or 6 prosecutors total on staff in each of these counties. So, they are going to be very under-equipped to handle a case like this. And honestly, I just think Linda Stanley got out over her skis too much on this case. I think that she saw an opportunity to be a champion. I mean, I believe that her motives were pure. I believe that she believed that she could prove this case against Barry Morphew. But if you think about it, she's missing the classic triumvirate. Okay, she didn't have a body, she didn't have a murder weapon, she didn't have a crime scene at the time. Not only was she going to have to prove that Barry Morphew was a murderer, she was going to have to convince people that someone was actually killed. And so, I think that if I were in her ear back then, I would have told her, do not prosecute this case right now. You don't have it. And that's what other members of her prosecution team, as well as members of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, were telling her. I mean, there was infighting big time going on in this prosecution, which you never want. I mean, that's a red flag right there. So it was a myriad of issues. And you're correct, Linda Stanley has actually been disbarred. It is really, really difficult for a prosecutor to get disbarred in the state of Colorado, which tells you a little bit about her conduct. So it was a mess, but I'll also tell you that the reset button is absolutely being pressed here. There's a new team. This is a totally new case. We now have a body and a lot more information about the crime scene. So this is completely different than where we were a few years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing. No body, no murder weapon, no crime scene. You don't hear that too often, and that's why there was no case, I guess. You see here, May 5th, 2021, Barry first arrested. After a year, prosecutors dropped the charges, didn't have a case without the testimony of expert witnesses, plus what we just mentioned. Chris, just back to this issue of why was the body moved, I'm going to read a comment from our good friend Abby Taha here. Maybe law enforcement sniffed too close to where she was first. What's your best guess as to why this body, sadly more like a pile of bones, why was it moved ultimately from one location to another? Do you have a thought?
Well, one thing I remember from covering the case from the beginning is that when Barry checks into this hotel, I don't know if you guys remember this or not, he checked into this hotel and he was supposed to be at the job site, but he wasn't. And then when his other workers showed up to be with him, they came into this hotel room and they couldn't stay because it smelled like bleach. And so, and then he sort of brushed it off to say that it was because it was the indoor pool. His room was near the indoor pool, but chlorine bleach smells a little bit different than, actual bleach. So did he actually do something to Suzanne in that hotel room? I've always had that question. And I just wonder if, I sort of agree that they were getting too close. I think that because in the beginning they said, the prosecution had said, when the snow melts, we think we know where she is. And maybe they did know where she was. And he got antsy and moved the body, or was the body someplace else? And it was never out in the elements, because they've talked about the fact that her clothes had not deteriorated at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I find that interesting. So how can she be outside and moved from one location outside to another location outside if, even her clothes are pristine, let alone, an animal hasn't scavenged or, insects, things like that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think the presumption is that those clothes were moved, but obviously weren't in the elements to be weathered the way you might expect them to. For Carrie here to Mike, are they insinuating that her bones, Mike, this came up the other day, maybe you have an answer, that the bones were bleached with actual bleach or bleach from the sun? That was a question that people weren't 100% clear on. Are you?
No, and frankly, I think that's the choices. Is it chemically induced, or is it something that because of the soil that she was in was more prone to? This smell of bleach is really interesting from the hotel room. Was there bleach poured on the body? Did that create this from a chemical reaction, or did there end up being some kind of animal depredation, that an animal actually dug up that body and started to spread that body around a little, and that's what promoted the need to rebury her in a different location? So when we look at these disposal sites, we have to think about the person who chooses them and why they choose specific spots. And we've talked about lots of options, and to me, those are really interesting options. The idea of the sale of the house would be held, if I understand Colorado law, and again, I might need you to fill me in on this, but I thought there was a 7-year window before she could be declared deceased, which some of those funds from the house sale could have been actually frozen and held in escrow until that actual declaration is made. So moving the body and putting it where it's more easily discoverable, that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't personally think that was the motivation for moving the body. I think it's also interesting, you talked about DA Stanley saying when they released or when they dismissed the charges that they were close to finding a body. Is that what prompted a move, that I've got to go? They might be thinking they know where it is, but if they're getting close, maybe that's a reason. But the thing that becomes really interesting in these kinds of things from a behavioral and a profiling standpoint, Joel, is the idea that the clothing that she was wearing is different than the soil and the decomposition that went on. So there also is some staging going on, that body's placed in a new location. Now, what was that clothing? Was it bike clothing to fit a narrative, or was it something else? Was it evening clothing? Those are all really important kinds of questions that we'll learn more about as the investigation is exposed during the trial. But each of them give us a whole different bag of things to think about and to explore. And, we're all really good at theories because we don't have enough facts. And so I guess we just say those are all really good reasons to move that body. And we have to think about the fact too that when we talk about crime scenes, there are multiple crime scenes in many kinds of investigations, not just the place where the murder occurred in Suzanne's case, but maybe that first burial site. There may have been a second or a third burial site. We have no idea if this body had been moved to different locations. But as the entomologists and the people that are doing the soil samples come back, they're going to be able to say, nah, this was 2 different locations, or maybe even more, that really point to the kind of staging that I think we see at the end of this when she's discovered.
Yeah, the intricacies of this investigation.
These cases are great, aren't they?
Yeah, it's pretty detailed. It's mind blowing. Pharaoh Gamma, very smart and always in the chat on stories like this. What was in the FedEx package? So a lot. This actually was something I wanted to bring up much later, but it's interesting. And Colin, this goes to you. So this woman, Shasha Dark, the now ex-girlfriend who is speaking out against Barry Morphew, was actually arrested. I think it was 2021 for trespassing because she went to get a package. It was a FedEx package. Do we know anything about this or more about this, Colin?
Not I don't know too much about this particular issue. I know that there was a law enforcement contact because apparently she had tried to pick up a package at the house. Of course, the speculation is, was she doing this at the behest of somebody? What was in the package? From what I understand right now, that's still unknown, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if your other panel know any more about that particular part, but that's all I know about it.
Yeah, and Chris, I promise I'm coming to you, but Mike, I think you might know the answer to this from Tennis Girl 101. Is there a way to determine how long the remains were in that particular area, the boneyard in Saguache County? Can they figure that out?
Well, I think the scientists will be able to come back with some determinations. But again, at that point, I mean, this is almost 4 years into her disappearance. Most of the tissue that a bug would give us some indication of how long it's been working, or the natural decomposition process would give us, is going to be probably the science we have to lean on in this particular case. And we know that there are probably, from what I'm hearing, 2 different soil types: the soil site type that she's located in, and other soil that's affixed to bone or clothing or other kinds of things that are going to suggest different kinds of soil compositions, whether it's dry and arid or whether it's more moist in nature. And those would give us some indication, but nothing like a bug would if there were some bugs still chewing on some parts there, which is kind of, I apologize for my bluntness at times, but.
Yeah, understood. Also, on my end, a little bit of an apology because this story has a million different tentacles going in different directions, and we're kind of hopping all over the place. But I've got 3 amazing guests here, so that is the reason. One of the other tentacles, interesting sort of facts, is that unidentified male DNA was found in the car, Chris. This is where your storytelling, as a fictional writer, comes in, telling a story, and suddenly, you've got the unknown male DNA. Any thoughts on this? Was it perhaps one of Barry's workers? Was it potentially the killer? I'm going to ask Colin about this. The defense is going to grab onto this, no doubt, and they're going to highlight it and say, look, we don't know who this person's DNA, whose DNA this is. This could be the killer. How do we know it's Barry Morphew? Your thoughts on this?
Well, I actually read a comment, maybe it was in Reddit or something, where someone said it could have been the Chick-fil-A person delivering your iced tea to you that touched the inside of the car. So, I mean, that sort of touch DNA stuff, as many people as she's had in her car, who could say, but I feel like that's probably something the defense team is going to want to talk about a lot. They have to rule him out somehow. And everyone's coming up with all the hard evidence against him. So, I mean, he's going to need some hard evidence to defend himself. And it seems to me like the DNA is going to be the thing that they're going to do, because, I mean, they're just looking for reasonable doubt, correct? I'm not an attorney.
Yeah.
I just talk about them on my podcast, but they're looking for reasonable doubt, and any way they can get into a juror's head that, listen, there could have been a serial rapist, that's where they were going with it for so long. So it's interesting.
So Colin, if you're picking up this case, how strongly are you latching on? I mean, how potent a piece of evidence is that for the defense, or is that going to be dismissed by the prosecutors saying, look, it's a million people that go in and out of this guy's car, could be anybody's for any number of reasons?
Look, as a defense attorney, I think that area is one of Barry's, I guess, strongest areas of exploration. Okay. We've read the arrest affidavit. They do in the grand jury indictment, in the affidavit, they talk about those 3 profiles. Now, again, remember back with the original prosecution, when the Stanley was running, she ran into problems with this because she was not able to disclose timely the evidence and the significance of that evidence they had to the defense team, and of course the defense is running wild with this in the first prosecution. They're like, wait a minute, you're charging Barry Morphew without a body, without a weapon, without a crime scene, and you have unidentified DNA from 3 different sources in this car. Are you kidding me? And even I was like, how can this even go forward? But coming back to the kind of question in terms of where we are now, according to the arrest affidavit, the investigators have tried to run down the sources of the DNA and have concluded very very succinctly in their affidavit here. They just say, well, nothing of significance came back related to those individuals, and they kind of brush it off. Well, that's not something that you can really brush off. And certainly if I'm his defense attorney, one of the biggest things I'm looking at here is alternate suspect, right? Anything you can use to show that there might have been some alternate suspect, known or unknown, you are going to make a big deal about that. Couple that with kind of taking the approach from the defense of saying, look, the prosecution and the police have had tunnel vision this entire time. From the very beginning, they have focused on one person and one person only, Barry Morphew, and they have basically biased their investigation around that tunnel vision. This is one more example of that. They don't have interest in finding the source of this DNA, and you should be suspicious, jury, by letting them dismiss it so easily. I think that's the approach I would take with regard to some of this evidence.
Yeah, and Colin, just to follow that up, we're actually seeing this play out in real time with Brian Koberger in Idaho about alternate suspect theory, but the judge made it very clear to Ann Taylor, the public defender there, you're not coming into my courtroom and just pointing your finger. You've got to have some evidence pointing to an alternate suspect. So my question is, what's the legal threshold in Colorado to say, well, someone else did? Can you just point the finger and say, well, it was just somebody else? Or do you have to have something tangible like a DNA fingerprint, but does that then have to be matched to somebody?
Sure. They don't have to have much. That's for sure. I mean, they don't have to have a name. The defense I'm talking about, they don't have to say, well, we believe that this murder was actually carried out by, John Doe, and this is date of birth, and this is why we think that. They, keep in mind, the burden of proof is always on the prosecution, not only to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, but also to disprove any defenses that the defense could raise for this, such as alternate suspect. However, a judge is going to at least require, I think the legal term is a scintilla of evidence, that there might be some sort of alternate suspect. You can't just say someone else did it and let that defense fly. You have to be able to say, look, here's what we have. Here's why we believe someone or more than one person was involved. And they might be able to do this just based on the discovery of the DNA. That might be enough. I think that probably meets the definition of a scintilla. Now, is that going to convince a jury of anything? Time will tell.
Yeah. This is an interesting comment here from Dawn. Bleached can throw off cadaver dogs. If she was around the home first and he moved her in the future to the boneyard area. People also are commenting that Barry is a tracker. I don't know if that is actually accurate or not, but he did know, I guess, how to throw people off a trail. So that's something else to consider if, in fact, he was. Sharon Shipley here. What was she moved in? Any ideas, panel? Any guess? I mean, I would have no idea. Mike King, you're probably the one closest to be able to take a guess at this. Any thoughts on this?
Oh, heavens, no. It would be a guess.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because this is interesting. So the BAM, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. There are 3 ingredients inside essentially wildlife tranquilizer, very potent stuff. And now we know that Barry Morphew was the only person with a prescription for this in the entire state of Colorado, outside of, wildlife agencies or whomever else would be using deer tranquilizers, which I know very little about. But what we do know, what we're learning, is that her body began metabolizing the drugs, Mike, indicating that she had lived for some time while sedated, which is a whole other, I guess, level of chill and cold-heartedness here, that this woman was potentially in this state for quite some time. What do you make of that from your vantage point as a criminal profiler?
Well, I think it was an easy way to get control of her because he had used that. He was experienced in it. He understood what was going to happen. The drug does not cause death, although it's built for animals, not for human beings and not for 120, 40-pound women. It's built for taking down a full deer or elk or moose and treating that, putting a collar on the animal, and then giving another drug to resuscitate the animal and send it off. But the thing that's so important about this, and I think the thing that the grand jury indictment kind of gives us a glimpse into, is that there's a discussion that the theory might be that once that drug was induced, that slowly takes effect, not slowly, rather quickly takes effect, but it takes a minute or two before that takes effect and incapacitates the animal, or in this case, if they're correct, allegedly, that it incapacitates Suzanne. And then she's still alive, but she's basically paralyzed, unable to do anything. So they talk about things like they kind of tip their hand toward asphyxiation. And Colin, I don't know if you read the affidavit and the grand jury indictment in detail, but I wonder if that's what they're going to be saying, is that once she was incapacitated, it was easy to do something like asphyxiate her, but they don't really have tissue to show that she was asphyxiated. So I'm wondering how they're coming up with that.
Mike, I think that's a really, really good point. And it's, I kind of had the same question as I was reading the affidavit, because certainly they're saying that they found that BAM cocktail of drugs inside the bones of her body, but they didn't seem to suggest that that's actually going to be the cause of death. That was it was that chemical, or that cocktail of chemicals, that actually killed her. And you're right. We don't have, what we know is there's no other evidence of foul play. There's no evidence, for example, that she was tranked and then shot, or that there was some sort of blunt force trauma, because of course the autopsy looks for those things. I think asphyxiation is probably an excellent candidate, because the forensic trail that it's going to leave is relatively minimal, especially after a body has been exposed to the natural elements decomposing for so long. It seems like it would be extremely difficult to show that she was strangled later, which makes me believe that could have been what happened.
That's interesting. As a matter of fact, I just happened to catch 2020 last night because I have no life, so I go home and watch true crime, and that's exactly what happened. This was a case I didn't know about it. University of Florida, and it was two friends. They might have even been roommates, but long story short, the one friend was dating a girl who the other friend had previously dated. He was incredibly jealous, and then tranquilizes this college student and ultimately suffocates him while he's sedated, and they ultimately are able to prove that, and this other kid gets convicted. So that's how that went down, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe he sedates her to the point that he can then take her life in another way here. But it's, by the way, Mike, you'll be happy to know, Canine Catherine from Maui has been one of our longtime followers, says that Mike King can say some of the most horrific things in the sweetest ways possible.
Well, thank you, because it is an ugly topic.
Yeah, most of these things are.
Yeah.
Chris, to you, there's video, cringe-worthy video of Lee Moore, which is the alias for Barry Morphew, hitting on a woman in presumably, I think it was Gilbert, Arizona. What about this fact that he was he's in a trailer park, he's moved to Arizona, and now he's hitting on women with an alias, Lee Moore? What do you make of that as a podcast host, as a thriller writer?
Well, I think he's got a huge ego. I think he has such a huge ego. At the same time, I don't think he would want people to know who he really is. I mean, being away, he sort of escaped. So, and he's not a bad looking guy. I mean, I can sort of set that aside. I think he's probably evil, but we'll let the jury determine that. But I think he has such a huge ego that he felt like, you know what, I'm a man. I'm going to go out and flirt. I'm going to hit on these women, and women have always responded to me. And he's a narcissist. He's very much about himself. So why wouldn't he be out there hitting on other women using an alias? Because all women love true crime, and they're going to know exactly who Barry Morphew is. You know, they would be like, no thanks. So I feel like I think that's his ego. And I think that came into play early on when he was just like, they're going to believe anything I say about the chipmunks and the turkey and the elk and I turned this way, then maybe it was a mountain lion. And I just think that he's very confident in himself, and I think he has a huge ego, which may be his downfall, because if I was writing it, his ego would be his downfall. Yeah.
I think most women consider him a fairly good-looking guy. The guy played pro baseball or semi-pro baseball at one point. He's athletic and probably was used to getting women, and hasn't stopped hitting on them despite his ex-wife's death here.
Hey, Joel,
yeah.
I just want to bring up one point.
Sure.
I remember when that image initially came out and was socialized. And I'd just like to see us maybe snope that rather than walk away thinking that that's what he was doing, is hitting on people, because I think my memory is telling me that somebody ran into him in a bar, and it may have been in Indiana shortly after all of this was happening. And that was the conversation, is he's back in Indiana. But again, I might be completely wrong. And I like to try to be pretty even in my analysis of things, but I really believe that was just a chance meeting of somebody that happened to bump into him in a bar, not that he was out hitting on people. But what I'd love to do on these kinds of things, and I wish we'd do more when we socialize them, is instead of putting what our narrative is that we want to get out, just put the truth out. And I don't know what the truth is.
Yeah, that's a great point. I read that it was in Gilbert, Arizona, inside of a bar. So maybe we're talking about two different incidents, but I'll check it out, and I appreciate that.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, because there is a definite, inclination to do exactly what you just said, which is either pile on or sensationalize things. I don't like to do that myself. By the way, Carm is in the house. For those wondering, she's the woman next to me in that logo behind me. That is my mother. Turns 86, and the co-host at times of this show. She is weighing in. She's also a licensed therapist, weighing in here about her thoughts on what went down. No bigger true crime fan than Carm. She's always watching the shows. Colin, back to you. Extradition. That's something everyone's asking about. He's being held in Arizona, but is going to be extradited. He waived his right, so he is going to be headed back to Colorado. It has to be done within 30 days. Walk us through the process. How does that happen? How soon will he be back?
Yeah, I actually expect him back pretty quickly. Generally, extradition is it's more of a formality than anything else. You can contest extradition. It's very rarely done, just because essentially what you're doing by contesting extradition is suggesting that the extraditing state doesn't have the authority to extradite you. Sorry, in a first-degree murder case, with this case, he was going to get extradited no matter what. It's not a surprise to me that he waived extradition. So really, once a person waives extradition, they're then kind of at the mercy of the home state to literally come and pick that person up in Arizona and transport them to Colorado. I cannot imagine that Colorado wanted to wait too long for this. Honestly, the minute he waived extradition, I would have expected, arrangements to be made to get him transported to Saguache County, where he will be held. Or I think actually they might be holding him in Alamosa, from what I
understand. Alamosa, yeah, Alamosa.
Pardon me. But I've been kind of checking. I checked today to find out if he was here in Colorado, because I think it's going to be soon.
And by the way, how far is Alamosa from? Is it a neighboring county to Saguache?
Yeah, it's Alamosa. This is all kind of on the, southeastern part of the state of Colorado. Alamosa is about 3 hours from Denver. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty big municipality. It's a college town. And so that's where he's going to be held while the case is pending.
Yeah, and they're saying not to expect any court hearings till he arrives there. But
Right.
the predictions are that he could be moved as soon as this weekend, which is 2 days away. Juicy Jules here reminding us, she did have cancer twice. She had that port in her, just another sad aspect to an already pretty sad story. Chris, back to you. So Shasha Dark, who's an interesting last name, by the way, but she is the now ex-girlfriend of Barry Morphew, who dated him for 4 years after Suzanne goes missing on Mother's Day of 2020. What's your reaction here? She says in this interview, and I quote, "He just wanted to heal and move forward, but the wife was still missing." And he talked about moving forward. How do you, I don't know, how do you negotiate that paradox?
Well, if he's guilty of killing his wife, then I think he has to put on a good face and try to mourn and try to be upset. He put out that video with the phone number saying that he loved her, if you've got her, please bring her home, that kind of thing. And he does have 2 daughters. So even if he didn't like his wife and, he is guilty of this murder, I think for the long haul or for the short haul, he has to at least to his girls, feel bad that his wife is gone. So maybe that's a part of it. Maybe he's just, putting on a good face to say, I really miss her. Or maybe he actually did it and he's traumatized, and in his own screwed up head, he's trying to reconcile that and be like, well, I feel bad that she's gone now that she's gone. But yeah, it's hard to tell because, there's so many people who just feel like watching him. And again, I it's wrong just to say, the husband did it. I even have a shirt that says that. I mean, my podcast is called Hitch to Homicide. So, and a lot of times people just do think that the husband did it, but
Chris, I got to ask, are you married?
Oh yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Just give me your husband's name. I'll pass it on to Colin after this is all over.
Well, he always tells everybody he sleeps with one eye open because, I write about killing people too. So, and try to figure out who killed him. But, I think that, he has to put on a good act. He has to be the innocent man, even if he's guilty. So even if he's innocent and everybody thinks he's guilty, he has to put on that face of the innocent man, of the grieving man with his 2 daughters too.
Yeah. By the way, Carm is asking, of course, about the love interest. Carm likes the drama. He was eliminated as a suspect, and that male foreign DNA is not his. The quote here is, he just wanted to heal and move forward. This is the girlfriend. And obviously there are similarities, as Mike pointed out, between she and Suzanne Morphew. But she says, I guess there was some cognitive dissonance on my part. It's something you can't even comprehend, that somebody you thought was a good person could even be capable of doing, something like that. Mike, this is right up your alley. Cognitive dissonance is essentially where you can separate yourself. You tell yourself one thing while the reality is something else. I don't know if this is a protective measure, but to her, she wanted to be in love with this guy. I guess she wanted a partner. So was she rationalizing it in her own mind? And what do you think all of a sudden makes, I don't know how sudden it was, but what do you think now has made her have this change of heart?
Well, I don't know if she's had a sudden change of heart, but she's felt like she needed to come out and be more vocal. She clearly, from what I've been able to read, the relationship separated about 2 years ago, but she did go to Arizona and visit him in 2024, according to that article. And what a great job they did on this article, because we got just a treasure trove of information. And we see this kind of behavior in domestic violence cases, in child sex abuse cases, where the child still loves their parent. They still have connection, or they love the uncle that happened to abuse them or something else. And they're faced with this thing where they have to make a decision. But most importantly, Joel, I found in my investigation of cult activity and the kind of coercive control, and she brings up the word coercive control, but we see in cult cases where people invest everything they've got. And I'm talking about convert cults, not the generational cults like the FLDS, but maybe some guy who all of a sudden thinks that he's been appointed by God to twist the caps left instead of right or something like that, and people start following him. But what happens is once people make an investment, they either have to admit they're wrong, or they have to continue the narrative of saying this couldn't be, they can't be this way. And for anyone who might be casting stones at the girls, Mallory and Macy, I would just hope that we back off on stuff like that, because they're invested in this individual as their father. They've already lost their mother. And to have them make a decision of this is good or bad is just really an unfair thing for us to do. I suspect they have vacillating kinds of emotion and concern, but for the girlfriend, she invested everything in the relationship. And so she either has to say, man, I was duped, or I made a bad decision, or she has to continue to double down and say, no, it's just not possible that he would do that. And I just think it's a natural human behavior.
Yeah. And Mike, I mean, since you mentioned Macy and Mallory, and they're the daughters of Barry and Suzanne Morphew, I mean, how do you psychologically assess someone like Barry, not the girls, but someone like Barry, who is seemingly a very good father and nurturing to the daughters, but very manipulative and coercive and controlling with the wife? How can he kind of switch from one sort of persona to the other? And with that said, I'll give you the caveat. I saw in the chat a comment saying that they believe either Macy or Mallory or both are actually afraid of the father. How do you see all this?
Yeah, I don't know if they are or not, but what I do believe is that, like any child, they probably love their father. They may not like pieces of and parts of him, but they love their father. And you brought up an interesting thing that is something that I learned as an investigator, especially dealing with serial predators. And that is that we have to look at the personas in people's lives, and we all have them. So I'm going to kind of just make this for the four of us, but we each have that public side where we really put on our best face. Today we're doing that. We're trying our best to smile at the right moment, to be a little bit quirky or a little bit funny, but we're trying to really appeal to people. And that's this public persona that we all put across. And think about your wildest, politician. But then we have our private persona. And that's the thing that maybe our loved one sees. It might be our significant other that gets to see our warts and gets to see when we're a little bit angry or when we're frustrated. And then you got this secret persona where that little Tasmanian devil lives that you try and constantly to keep in line. For a man, it might be looking at someone and saying, oh boy, I'd really like to be with that person. And then you snap and you catch yourself and you say, holy cow, that's not appropriate. Get back in line. But for the Tasmanian devil, it's no, by golly, I deserve it. People like me. I'm going to go do what I want to do. And so we're constantly trying to figure out what persona is surfacing and whether that persona can be trusted or not.
Mike, if you watch a show with my mom and I, we're doing a new show on Fridays. Leave a comment. You'll quickly find out that we're not making our public personas too appealing to many. We are revealing the good, the bad, and the ugly, trying to get away from true crime for one day. And that's exactly, we take comments, and my mom as a therapist answers them. And now my wife, the COE, the chief of everything, will yell at me for promoting a show that is not true crime related. I think we're going to start another channel for that one, but I can't resist doing it because Carm yells at me and will yell at others and give advice that's not real advice because we can't give you licensed therapy on air, but it's the closest thing you're going to get. So check it out. It's called Leave a Comment, a very original title on that.
I'm going to watch for that. Hey, I'm going to just go dark for just a moment while I get my power supply.
Yeah, no worries. I think they still completely do think he's innocent. My heart is broken. I'm just, and this is obviously Shasha Dark speaking about the daughters here. I'm just in the biggest grief for his daughters because they're two beautiful young ladies that have gotten to know that I've gotten to know. It's hard for them, but they're doing okay. Still very supportive of their father. They probably never had a negative experience with him. I don't know about that. He has always been there, always listening and wanting the best for them. Interesting comment. And Colin, to you. First off, I want to dig back into Shoshana for a moment, but the defense attorney is a guy named David Beller, and I've heard only very good things about him. They say he is one of the best, if not the best, next to you, criminal defense attorney in Denver. Is this true?
Yeah, obviously, I didn't get the call from Mr. Morphew, so I guess I'll have to talk about the other folks who did. But no, I know David. He's very well known in the Colorado legal community, specifically the Colorado criminal defense community, and even in a state like Colorado, even in big jurisdictions like Denver, we all kind of know each other. And David is a guy who's been around for a long time. He's a former public defender. He's a former past president of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, which is an organization that I belong to. So, Barry Morphew definitely selected a very strong attorney and someone who knows what he's doing, someone who's no stranger to murder cases, someone who is no stranger to high profile cases. Conversely, Ann Kelly, the district attorney, she is also a very seasoned prosecutor. I know Ann. I used to work with her. We were prosecutors together in the 18th Judicial District, which covers suburban Denver, like Arapahoe County, Aurora, things like that. So she comes from an urban prosecution background herself. And she ran I think she was appointed by the governor to take over in the 12th Judicial District. And she's a very capable attorney. She's tough. I'll tell you right now, having worked with her on both sides, I used to work with her in the office, and I used to have cases as a defense attorney where she would be my opposing prosecutor. She's tough, but she's very good at her job. So we're talking about really A-game attorneys on both sides here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and Colin, just this comment's come up, and you see it here again from Brenda Redmond. I'm afraid to even bring this up with Mike because he's going to caution us to be fair to everyone, which I agree with. But Shasha Dark is a co-conspirator, in my opinion, is what Brenda says. She called in a fake tip, and then we know about intercepting a package or picking up a package. But the bigger question here, Colin, is it possible that she is being looked at as either a co-conspirator or someone who played some sort of role in this in some other way?
Oh, I mean, I think it's very possible. I don't want to obviously say anything that I don't have support for, but I mean, I've been around enough of these cases to know that the prosecution is certainly going to want to talk to anybody who had contact with Barry Morphew, not only around the time that Suzanne went missing, but in the last 5 years. What's been going on the last 5 years? I'll be honest with you. I was curious if we were going to see anything in this affidavit about any continuing surveillance methods that law enforcement employed even after his first case was dismissed. Now, obviously, the police are limited in terms of how they can follow someone around. Like, they can't put a GPS tracker on his car because you need probable cause to do that. However, what you can do is you can kind of drive by his house. You can keep, kind of loose surveillance on him, see what he's up to, and see who he's interacting with. Are there people coming to his house? Does he have visitors? Who are those people? Do we want to interview those folks? And so I'm sure law enforcement's going to be taking a good look at anybody who was in his periphery, in his circle of people. Heck, they might even reach out to the person in Arizona on that video in Gilbert where he's hitting on this person as Lee Moore. What did he tell you? What did he say? Did he ever go by Barry? I would imagine they're going to run down all of these types of folks and see if they can shake anything out of them.
Yeah, and Colin, I don't want to pour salt in the wound, but if you were called for this, would you take it? Are there cases that you would not take as a criminal defense attorney?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, this is a mammoth case that requires a ton of effort and resources and things like that. I've definitely handled homicide cases in the past. Not my specialty. My specialty has become talking about those cases on places like this and following them as we all do. But I will tell you this. I mean, we have a fiction writer on our panel today. You can't make this up, right? I mean, this is this whole case from the start of it. Every single thing that's happened, the murder without a body, the prosecution, the disbarment of the district attorney. It's got it all. And it's right here in this one case. So from that perspective, it's had me captivated from the very beginning. It's got a ton of legal issues, which I love talking about. Who knows whether or not the David Beller and his team is going to attack this prosecution based on the flawed prosecution that happened earlier. I think we're probably going to have a lot of pretrial motions about that stuff. But this is a crazy case. To answer your question, if Barry had wanted to make an appointment with me, sure, I would have sat down with him. I would have talked to him. I would have seen where it goes. But it's a monster of a case, but I think David Beller is very well equipped to handle this defense.
I wonder if David Beller. There's been talk, and I know it's not going to be, I guess, made public, but that he has taken the case pro bono because Barry Morphew does not have too much money, apparently. So have you heard anything in those regards?
I have not, and that's definitely possible. But I'll tell you, I mean, a case like this is going to demand so much time, so much resources, so much finances. I mean, there's going to be a lot of expert witnesses you probably need to line up to talk about animal tranquilizers, talk about the decomposition of bodies and human remains. Remember, everything in the affidavit can be attacked. Everything in the police investigation can be attacked, and they've got a fight on their hands for sure.
Yeah. Well, everyone here is calling Mike King a legend, so I've got to be careful with my time. A couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Hey, I got that one question for you though. Did anyone find it interesting that he used the name Moore? And what was the reasoning for that? I mean, Suzanne was a Mormon, and I found that interesting, but I wondered if there was something deeper.
Kelly, you're not going to get a deep answer out of me, but Chris, not Kelly, Chris, your thoughts. I'm calling that's your alias is Kelly. Now, Chris, any thoughts on Lee Moore as an alias?
I mean, I think you probably it's hard to come up with a good fictional name. You really have to think about it. And it was probably the first thing that popped into his head. And, so it makes sense. I mean, he's even more few. He just cut it short. So I do have a question for Colin.
I love that. I love this. All the guests are asking the other guys. This is awesome. Go ahead.
Are cameras allowed in the courtroom in your state? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yes, they are. As a matter of fact, this is actually kind of a newer thing in Colorado. Judicial officers are required to allow for live streaming in courtrooms that are run by the state. So it doesn't extend to the municipal level, but certainly misdemeanor felony courtrooms, which would include this type of a case. I'm expecting the entire trial to be live streamed. So I've seen a lot of stuff in the chat about people wanting to go to the trial, and gosh, what a fascinating trial it will be. But I am expecting the whole thing to be online.
Yeah, that was my question. I mean, that's made for TV stuff. Court TV will be all over that. Yeah.
So will STS. Canine Catherine here. There have been so many cases lately that if there were movies, they would not be believed. To that point, again, just a few more questions, and then we'll get final thoughts. Chris, back to you. I said Kelly because Kelly's the one that just gave us a super chat. And she does that often. So big thanks to Kelly Sandiford. But Chris, to you, Suzanne, again, straight out of a novel here, but sadly it's not. She leaves a last text for Barry and says, and I quote, "I'm done. We need to figure this out civilly." She had a paramour. He was fooling around, but it seems like this one text was sort of the line in the proverbial sand that she drew, and maybe he just couldn't take it, and that's what precipitated all this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it maybe it was the breaking point. Maybe he had been planning something all along. It's hard to know. It is interesting to me. I mean, this was the second time she'd had cancer. She went into remission. She just finished chemo not long before all of this happened. So I have never read whether or not he was a supportive husband through any of that. I mean, to me, I wonder, were they putting on a good face for everybody? Was it very private? I know that she told her very close friend everything, and that she was afraid of him. And I'm sure she will end up being, I believe her name is Sheila. She'll end up being a witness. But, what sort of relationship did they have outside? I mean, Mike even talked about it. You have your public persona, you have your private persona. Obviously, in private, they're not getting along. They're both cheating. But to everyone else and to their girls, what was their relationship like? Because I feel like that might say whether or not he was premeditating this for a while.
It sounds like, yeah, he may have been, and that he planned to carry it out. Mike, what's your quick thought on that? You think it was an impulse killing or premeditated?
Oh no, I would guess that it probably was that he came home, that he discovered that she was texting. May have been that he just finally hit his maximum, and out of frustration he reacted. And I just have a hard time thinking a lot of people just sit and plan out how to do a murder. I know it happens. I've investigated them. But I think with the previous history of possible domestic violence in the relationship, and her finally saying, I'm done, that he was just running out of options to keep control. And this had to have been a really damaging thing to his ego, to think she's leaving him, especially if she's having an affair. Whether it's true that he was having an affair or not, which there are all kinds of wacky allegations out there. But I always kind of try to lean on the side of people are just not as ugly and mean. They just do stupid things, and then they become more tarnished over time as they try to get away with it.
That's an interesting take. Look at Mike, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, even the bad guys, which I like. Mike, another quick question for you here. This dryer inside the house, that's where they found this tranquilizer cover. But now they're also talking about that they found the shorts that he was wearing, presumably from that day. That seems potentially very sloppy. What does this point to you, and what direction? What do you take away from it?
Yeah, I always look at evidence from two buckets. One, that it's a conspiracy and everything's working out, or sometimes it just makes good sense. And maybe his clothes were dirty and he thought, I'm going to throw them in the washer at the same time I'm washing everything else. It just is so hard to come up with a theory based on so little facts. And I often say this on my little show where I talk about the fact that I loved Sherlock Holmes, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle penned the words that it's a capital mistake to theorize before we have evidence, because insensibly we spend all of our time twisting the facts to suit our theories rather than allowing the facts to unfold and come up with a real answer.
Well said again. Colin McCallen, amazing to meet him. Sounds like a fine Scotch, but he's a fine criminal defense attorney, and he is the host of Is This Legal? So, you're the defense attorney here. Just walk us through what is going on in David Beller's office right now. I mean, where do you start with this, and your final thoughts?
No, thank you. And again, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a pleasure.
I hope you'll come back.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think I don't think I'm saying too much when I say this is a really tough battle that the defense is going to have. I think that the presence of that animal tranquilizer in Suzanne Morphew, I mean, if there's anything that's a smoking gun in this case, and anything that comes close to that, it's probably that piece of evidence. But it's also a bunch of the other little stuff that kind of adds up to complete this picture that's not looking so rosy for Barry Morphew. So what I would be doing, though, if I were defending Barry, or if I were imagining what David is doing, we're talking about all the things. We spent a lot of time talking today about the things that we know. There's so much we don't know. Okay, we don't know exactly how Suzanne was killed. Obviously, there's this huge issue of where was she buried and how was she moved? Was she moved? Who moved her? There's so many unknowns that are just necessarily true, even given the prosecution's theory. So I would be spending a lot of time exploring alternate suspect evidence, all of the things that they can't prove, all of the things that they can't establish, and really kind of developing this idea that these people targeted Barry from the very beginning without having all the evidence, and they never looked back. I think that would be kind of the view I would have on this case from the defense perspective.
Who knows, man? Maybe Barry is still trying to reach you, Colin. You let us know if he gets through. You never know. Chris Calvert, great to meet you as well. Hitch to Homicide, I think that is the podcast. Chris is also, as you heard, a suspense thriller and I guess murder mystery writer, and now a best guest at STS Nation. So this story, looking back on it now, we're talking about betrayal, talking about hidden weapons, tranquilizers, emotional control. What element is missing from your standpoint or point of view as a writer, a person who writes murder mysteries and thrillers? What are we missing anything here?
Well, first off, truth is stranger than fiction. And so many writers, I mean, we use real live cases, actual cases to base criminals off of, to base killers off of. I mean, I don't know that anything is actually missing. I know there's a lot, just like Colin said, there's a lot of things, even little things that stack up against him. He told the police that I fixed a steak dinner for the both of us, and they only found one plate in the dishwasher. It's little things that sort of give off that idea that it's just too many little things adding up to say that, he's not guilty. But at the same time, I mean, the reason I do the podcast, I mean, I love to write about these things, but the reason I do the podcast in the first place is just so we can talk about the victims themselves, because we end up talking about how they died so many times. That's the legacy that they leave behind, how they were murdered or how they died. And I think it's really important to talk about how Suzanne lived and who she was and what a great mom she was and how she was a cancer survivor and a world beater and just an all-around wonderful woman. But as far as something missing from the story, I mean, this one's kind of got it all. And it's just going to, I think personally, again, not an attorney, just play one on my podcast. I think it's going to come down to who has the best attorney. Because I think any good attorney is going to be able, any good defense attorney is going to be able to start bringing up things about the police, sort of railroading the whole case in one direction. I mean, there's talk that they found her bike and they picked it up with their hands. There was no gloves used. They didn't try to, preserve that location where they found her bike and stuff. So I think there's a lot of room for a lot of things to come out in this trial. And again, truth stranger than fiction. And now I'm just so happy that it's going to be on. I'll be able to watch it from the comfort of my own office.
By the way, just make sure you're watching us and not Court
I
TV.
will watch you.
No offense to Julie Grant or Vinnie Politan, both my friends, but you need to watch it over here.
I will absolutely watch it there.
Colin, I lied. Another question, because it came up here, and then we'll get to Mike for a final thought. Do you think they're going to call Jeff, the ex-boy, the boyfriend, the guy that was seeing Suzanne, also the daughters here, also if she's not implicated in any way, which I'm not saying that she will be, but this Shasha Dark, can we expect to see them all as witnesses in this trial?
I'll give you my best shot at this, kind of what we know so far. I would think Jeff, he's we're talking about the boyfriend or the paramour of Suzanne. The relevant testimony that I think he brings is her dissatisfaction in her marriage. I think just by virtue of the fact that she's having an affair, it's very possible that she had voiced some concerns about Barry or about her situation. If he has information about that, I can see him as a witness for the prosecution. So at the moment, I'm going to say yes. I think he could be a likely witness in this case. As far as the daughters go, that's a tough one. I think that we were talking about it earlier on this episode. There's going to be an emotional attachment to these girls. Clearly, these girls lost their mother, and as far as human nature goes, clearly they probably do not want to even imagine the possibility that their father killed their mother. So who knows where they're at on this whole thing. based on what we could tell from the affidavit, they weren't really direct witnesses as to the disappearance or kind of the immediate 48 hours of activity that they weren't witnesses to, like the 48 hours activity that's preceded Suzanne's disappearance. So I'm going to say I am not sure on that one. As far as Shoshana, I am going to say I don't anticipate she's going to be a witness at this time. I think she's a little bit too much of a wild card, frankly, for both sides. On the one hand, the prosecution may not want to use her because, it's kind of odd that she's dating Barry Morphew for 4 years after she knows that his wife went missing. That's just kind of a weird thing that most people may decide not to do. Conversely, the defense is seeing these articles that she's given to the Daily Mail, and they're like, okay, well, she's not going to be helpful to us. She's turning on Barry. She's not going to be useful at all. So I'm going to say I don't think she's going to be a witness in the trial. That's my predictions for those witnesses.
You heard Mike King, a legend, according to the chat, host of Profiling Evil, obviously has investigated homicides and been in this world of figuring out crimes for many years. A couple quick questions for you, Mike, and your final thoughts. Someone just pointed out, I think it was Sherry Douglas, who's been here for many months, particularly cruel that she goes missing on Mother's Day. What do you make of that? Also, what do you think Barry is thinking in his cell right now? And your final thoughts.
Well, I have no idea what he's thinking, other than I found it interesting that he waived extradition as quickly as possible. He's trying to kind of control narrative as he might be able to, in my opinion, and a whole lot less press will happen with him waiving extradition than carrying this on and getting more face time. Plus, he's spending money maybe defending something that he would lose anyway. So he's getting back to familiar turf where he can start working on his defense and be closer to his attorney, which I think makes really good sense. I look at this whole thing and I'm pretty simplistic. I always go back to the evidence and I try to just introduce all this kind of seedy stuff. I like to see it introduced at sentencing rather than in the investigation. So I go back to the facts, and the facts are pretty simple. That probably the night before Mother's Day, he allegedly would have taken her life. I don't think it happened on Mother's Day, but Mother's Day was the perfect time to head out of town and stage things, if in fact everything ends up being true, and that it's more about Mother's Day leaving town and staging things. And so as a guy who looked at criminal behavior my whole career, I'd want to know, is working on Mother's Day a normal thing for Barry, or on other holidays? Or is this outside of what's normal? Is turning off his phone and turning off the telematics on his vehicle normal behavior? And I'd be putting this in front of I'd be hoping a prosecutor would be putting this in front of a jury. That is this something that you do? Do you turn off your phone? Do you turn off and figure out how to turn off the metrics on your car? I thought that it was interesting, and I always think it's interesting when people, rather than coming back in a situation like this and saying, holy cow, what's going on, and looking through the house like a madman. He doesn't look through the house like a madman on his first trip into the house, according to body cam and other testimony. He appears to already know that she's not there. And it always bothers me when people get thrown under the bus like the neighbor. Go over and check and make sure you look for her bicycle. She might be out on a ride. And then coming up with theories like the mountain lion or the boogeyman and all these other things, instead of saying, let's look for my wife. All of those things always cause me a lot of concern as an investigator, because I think it's more about what's not being said than's being said. And so, Joel, I could go on for an hour of all the reasons why I think he's got a tough mountain to climb. And thankfully, I think that this will all come out pretty darn clearly. But then what we didn't have 3 years ago or 2 years ago when these charges were dropped is we didn't have BAM in her bones, in her marrow, and that only one person has access to that drug outside of people from Wildlife Resources. Those kinds of things really make this a challenge that he's going to have to climb, but in my mind, start making it a whole lot easier to theorize what might have happened.
Yep, it's the BAM, and to Colin's point, there's a body. There's potentially a murder weapon with a rifle. So we've got a lot of things getting tied up here. We're going to see how it plays out. We're going to go the Mike King route, which is the right route, which is to follow the evidence, not get sensationalistic, which we have the habit of doing in true crime. And remember that they are real people. This is a real family. If I can get the photo up of the family, there we go. And I can't get rid of that comment, but I can bring this up. But so huge thanks to Chris, Colin, and Mike. And by the way, tomorrow, if things aren't crazy enough, we've got closing arguments and Sean Diddy Combs. Each side allotted 4 hours for closing arguments. Imagine that. Imagine if Colin was preparing those closings tonight. I'm sure he's very happy he's not. That's 8 hours of closing arguments. Does Diddy walk? Does he get convicted? Time will tell. We'll see you all tomorrow. Love you, America. Love you, Kentucky, Utah, and Colorado. And justice for Suzanne. And let's think about Macy and Mallory, obviously going through a really tough time. Look how beautiful Suzanne was. Tragic American story here. Stuff that you can't make up, even though Chris does a good job of it. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Guys, stick around 1 second if you can.